Thanks everyone for joining us here. This is our presentation, our public webinar about the Skookumchuck Dam, what the Office of Chehalis Basin is doing around the Skookumchuck Dam. So hopefully you're all in the right place. I'm going to start by introducing the three folks that'll be kind of guiding you through the webinar today, starting with myself. I'm Nat Kale. I work for the Office of Chehalis Basin, which is part of the state's Department of Ecology. And I am a planner, and I do work to try and reduce flooding impacts and improve aquatic species habitat in the Chehalis Basin. We also have two other folks who will be helping out today. Mary, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Nat. I'm Mary Martz with Anchor QEA. I'm a senior wetland and fisheries biologist, and I'm helping manage the consultant team that is working for the Office of Chehalis Basin, looking at various scenarios that might be considered for Skookumchuck Dam.
Thanks, Mary. Tess, go ahead.
Hi, Nat. Hi, everybody. My name is Tess Wendell, and I'm with Ross Strategic. And I'm here to be tech support and help with any question and answers that are coming through tonight. If you're having some tech support, I'm going to throw my email in the chat. And you'll also be able to kind of communicate with us via the Q&A box, which if you take a look down at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a nice little spot there where you can ask questions for us or upvote another person's question. You'll be muted right now, and you won't even see kind of some of your same audio options, but we will have a chance for verbal Q&A in between the presentations that you're going to hear tonight. So really excited to have everybody on board, and don't hesitate to reach out if you're having trouble connecting.
All right, thank you, Tess. So just a quick summary of what we're going to handle today. I'm going to kick off our presentation talking a little bit about sort of the history and the context of the Skookumchuck Dam, kind of answering that question of why it is that we're interested in the dam. And after I'm done, I'll be going for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session for about 10 minutes. After we're done with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mary Martz, who is going to talk more specifically about what it is that the Office of Chehalis Basin and her team at Anchor QEA are looking into, what kind of options we're considering for the dam. And then at the end of that, we will have another Q&A session to answer any questions that may have come up. And that'll be it for the day. We are recording this session, so you know. It will be available for folks in the future. Tess, I just wanted to check and make sure. Looks like you got through all of your technical intro. All right. So again, like Tess said, if you have any questions about that, you have ways to chat with her. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump into my presentation. I just want to check, Tess or Mary, you guys are seeing my presentation, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
All right, great. Well, I already introduced myself. You know, my name is Nat Kale, and we're here to talk about the Skookumchuck Dam. So, in 2007, the biggest flood ever recorded hit the Chehalis Basin, causing over $500 million worth of damage. But the city of Bokota on the Skookumchuck River was not nearly as badly affected. Earlier this year, in January, another major storm swept through the basin. It wasn't as bad as 2007. Early estimates of damage are less than 1/10 of the 2007 storm. But this time, Bokota wasn't nearly so lucky. They had the worst flooding they've had in recent history. And as you have probably guessed, the answer to this puzzle is the Skookumchuck Dam. So right now, this dam is at a crossroads. It was built to provide water for the nearby Centralia coal generation facility, which will stop burning coal entirely in 2025, eliminating the original purpose for the dam. So the Office of Chehalis Basin is looking at possible future scenarios for the dam. So there is plenty of flood and natural habitat concerns and issues along the Skookumchuck River. We already touched on flooding a little bit, but the Skookumchuck River also has steelhead, coho, and Chinook runs. It has picnic spots, it has parks. It is a major community amenity. And all of these things, flooding, fishing, and more, have been affected by the dam. So that's really my message today. The Skookumchuck Dam has created many changes for the Skookumchuck River, some good, some bad, and some neutral. The dam is located about at the halfway point of the river, which is near River Mile 22. Upstream, it's mostly forest, specifically Weyerhaeuser's Vale Tree Farm. Downstream land uses are a little more mixed. So there's still forest, there are some farms, and then of course there's the town of Bucota, and then all the way down at the confluence with the Chehalis River, there's the city of Centralia. The dam was built in the late 1960s, 1970, to provide power for the Centralia steam generation plant. The power plant was located in Centralia because it was near to the three key things it needed for power generation: fuel, a market, and water. So fuel came from the nearby coal mine. The markets were the Seattle and Portland metropolitan areas, and the Skookumchuck Dam provided the third need, which was water to run the turbines. Steam turbines require a lot of water to run, and there are two of them in the Centralia plant. One of the turbines shut down in 2020, and the second is planned to shut down in 2025. And we'll come back to that a little bit later in my presentation. On average, over the decades that it's been in operation, the two turbines have taken a little over 50 cubic feet per second of water to run. In the summer of 2021, the US Geological Survey recorded discharges as low as 15 cubic feet per second upstream of the dam. So you know 1 cubic foot is about 7.5 gallons. So during the summer, there just hasn't been enough water in the river to fill the turbines. So to ensure that there's enough water year round, the reservoir fills up in the winter, holding back water to release all summer. The reservoir is usually full all winter, and it's much emptier at the end of summer. And this, by the way, is the answer to the riddle I posed earlier about why some storms hit Bucota hard and some don't. The reservoir only reduces downstream flooding when it's low. In 2007, when the biggest flood in recent history hit the area, the reservoir was nearly empty, so there was plenty of room to hold back water, which reduced flooding in Bucota. During the storm in January of this year, the reservoir was full. So the water from the storm passed right over the top of it and onto Bucota and Centralia, where it made the flooding worse. Last week, when we had, again, a major rain event, it was sort of in between the two. The reservoir was low for this time of year, so there was some room to store water, and the storm wasn't as big as the January storm. So the amount of benefit that the dam provides for flooding really just depends on two things: the size of the storm and the amount of water in the reservoir beforehand. In the summer, of course, flooding isn't the concern. The summer is when the dam is doing what it was designed to do: augment the river flow with water stored during the winter. So as an example, going back again to September of 2021, when we had 15 cubic feet per second of water flowing through the river just upstream of the dam, right below the dam, that discharge was 65 cubic feet per second. That water then travels several miles downstream past Bucota and is taken in at the Centralia generating plant withdrawal point. Downstream of the withdrawal point, when the river was flowing at 15 cubic feet per second upstream and 65 cubic feet downstream of the dam, it was at 36 cubic feet per second at the withdrawal point. So, taking all this together, often during the winter, the reservoir is full and water flows right past the dam. In the summer, the reservoir slowly drains and there's more water in the river downstream of the dam than there is upstream. So the purpose of the dam is to provide water for power generation. One of the unintended side benefits is that sometimes in some storms, it reduces flooding downstream. But of course, dams have other impacts too, most famously on fish. The Skookumchuck Dam was built in 1970, and at that time, the State Department of Fisheries knew that it would cut off access to habitat above the dam. The Skookumchuck River is home to many species of fish, but the three salmonid species that call it home are Chinook, coho, and steelhead. There is evidence that chum used to run the Skookumchuck as well. Now, the Department of Fisheries estimated that before it was constructed, there were 4 to 5 miles of Chinook spawning habitat above the dam, about 8 miles of coho spawning habitat, and about 20 miles of steelhead spawning habitat. For reference, the reservoir is just under 4 miles long. Because the Department of Fisheries knew that there could be significant impacts to these 3 runs of fish, they required 2 things to offset that impact: fish passage facilities on the dam and a hatchery. We're not going to talk too much about the hatchery tonight. Just know that it's run by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it is supplied with water from the dam. That facility hatches coho and steelhead. The fish passage facilities for the dam are not up to modern standards. At the lower end, where the facilities are for transporting adult fish upstream, what you're seeing on the screen here, is what's called a trap and haul facility, where fish are captured at the base of the dam, then loaded onto vehicles, driven upstream, and released. The only run of fish that we know has been transported is steelhead. They were hauled at least starting in the 1990s up until 2008, and then trap and haul began again in 2021. So the second half of a fish transportation facility at a dam is a way to transport juvenile fish downstream. So at the Skookumchuck Dam, juvenile fish can swim downstream when the dam is spilling over the spillway. They can also sometimes make their way downstream when a small opening, a sluice, is opened in the dam. The bottom of the sluice is about 12 feet below the top of the spillway. When the water in the reservoir drops below the bottom of that sluice, there is no path for the juvenile fish to make their way downstream. But even when water is spilling over the spillway or discharging through the sluice, as it is here, it's still a dangerous passage for young fish. The water velocities are very high, and they run a major risk of being battered against the sides of this channel and being injured or killed. So overall, there used to be significant spawning habitat for at least 3 species of salmonid fish upstream of the dam. 2 of those species can't reach that habitat anymore, and a third faces major challenges. I should point out one more challenge for fish in the Skookumchuck, and that is that in a natural river, wood, sediment, and other materials flow downstream over time, creating all kinds of habitat: gravel bars, protected pools, backwaters, and more. The Skookumchuck Dam, like almost all dams, stops that flow of materials, which can make things harder for fish and other aquatic creatures downstream. So now I've talked about what the dam is for, generating power, what effect the dam has on flooding, and what effect the dam has on fish. I'm going to cover one more thing before I wrap up for questions, and that is water rights. So first, a quick refresher on water rights. In Washington, to establish a right to use water, you apply to the Department of Ecology. Ecology figures out whether there is water in a stream or river or groundwater aquifer that you want to draw water from. If there is water and your proposed use is a beneficial use, they grant you the right. The Skookumchuck Basin is currently closed to new water rights. That means that the Department of Ecology has determined that all of the water in the basin is already claimed, either for beneficial uses, like I just described, or by the state to maintain minimum flows in rivers and streams. There is no new water available in the Skookumchuck. The Skookumchuck Dam is associated with a water right that is owned by TransAlta of about 51.6 cubic feet per second and 28,000 acre feet per year. That means that TransAlta can withdraw up to 51.6 cubic feet per second at any given time. So that's about 400 gallons per second, up to a total volume of 28,000 acre feet over a whole year, which is about, it's about 9 billion gallons. So it's a lot of water. Even before the Skookumchuck Dam was built, the city of Centralia had applied for water rights from the Skookumchuck. Eventually, when the consortium of power plant operators that proposed and built the dam, when they proposed the dam, the city agreed to withdraw their application. Their reasoning was this: the coal mine that supplied the facility with fuel would eventually run out. And at that point, the generating facility would no longer need the water. Centralia and the operators, the plant operators, agreed that when the generating facility was shut down, the city would get first crack at the water right. Periodically, Centralia and the plant operator, which is now TransAlta, have renewed that agreement. So, as I said earlier, TransAlta has already shut down one of their turbines in the generation facility, and the second one is set to be shut down in 2025. Because water rights in Washington must be put to a beneficial use or relinquished, TransAlta worked with Ecology to establish a water bank for their rights associated with the dam. That water bank was approved in late 2021. The water bank allows TransAlta to sell their water right as an offset. So that means that when a new application for water rights comes to the Department of Ecology, to prove that the water is available for the new right they wish to establish, the applicant can point to TransAlta's water bank. Ecology still has to approve the water right, but the Skookumchuck Basin is no longer closed to new rights, as long as there is capacity in that bank. The city of Centralia is now interested in exercising their long-term agreement with TransAlta and plans to apply for a new water right, using the water bank as their source of water. They are working with the city of Chehalis to transfer some of that water to them as well. And there are other parties interested in the Skookumchuck Water Bank as well, though none are so far along as Centralia. All right, I have covered power generation, flooding, fish passage, and water rights. There's a lot more that we could go into. Each of these topics could be a full presentation by itself, but I'm going to wrap it there and just come back to what I said at the beginning. Skookumchuck Dam has created many changes for the Skookumchuck River, some of them good, some of them bad, some neutral. Now in the second half of this webinar, as I had said before, Mary Martz is going to talk about some of the concepts and designs we're starting to think about. But before that, I wanted to take 10 minutes or so to answer questions folks might have about what I just went over.
And just a note for folks who have joined via phone, when Nat is asking for hands here for questions, that's *9 on your phone to raise your hand.
Thank you, Tess. I'm going to start answering some of the questions that have come in. So the first one I'm seeing is from Gary Morishima, and he asks, will you be covering the drawdown on 2/21 that caused a sudden drop in flow during a critical period for spring Chinook fry emergence? I can speak to that a little bit. So the reason that there was a sudden drop and rise in discharge in the Skookumchuck River was a scheduled inspection by FERC. So that's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I believe. FERC has regulatory authority over the Skookumchuck Dam, and they are required to perform regular inspections. What happened in that case was they needed to have access to some of the piping that goes through the dam. And in order to do that, TransAlta had to close the valves that let water go through the dam. Usually when that happens, They do it in February for a very specific reason. Usually when that happens, there's water spilling over the spillway. So it's not really noticeable downstream. There's plenty of flow, even without the water going through the pipes. This particular case, what happened was we had a very dry February. So the water was actually below the spillway. So when they closed the valves, it resulted in a sudden and dramatic decrease in discharge downstream of the dam. FERC knows, TransAlta knows that that's an issue. And there have been conversations among FERC, TransAlta, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife about how to ensure that that doesn't happen again. One of the critical things that happened was that sluice, that fish sluice, was covered with debris. So there wasn't any discharge going through that sluice. So there are a few things they're looking at to make sure that that doesn't happen again. All right, that was a great question. Thank you for asking. Let me take a look at some of the others we have here. From Doug Jensen. Summaries of the dam by our consultants describe the flood protection as minimal in its summary report. How can I obtain the copies of this documentation as the source of this opinion? That's an excellent question. The report that was created by Anchor QEA is publicly available. We can get you a link to that. I think we can work on making sure that anyone who signed up for this can get that link. We will get you a copy of that report one way or the other. Lee first asked, what is the mortality rate of juveniles that pass over the dam or spillway? So unfortunately, I do not have an answer to that question. It hasn't been studied is the simple answer. So that is one of the things that we would like to look into. What is the mortality rate of juveniles? But as of right now, we don't have an answer. Doug Jensen again. When conducting your environmental studies, will that study be linked to the proposed basin dam study? As noted in that FEIS, I assume you're saying the federal environmental impact statement. Basin flood studies stopped below North Centralia and without the Skookumchuck Reach. So I'm a little confused about the last part of your question, but the first part of your question makes perfect sense. This is being conducted independently. It is not connected to the environmental impact statements or the work that's being done for the proposed dam on the Chehalis River upstream of here. So these are separate studies. They will come in front of the Chehalis Basin Board at a similar time. So they might be thinking about them or considering them in a similar time or a similar way, but the studies are being conducted separately. Karen Fraser asks, is there anything different about this water bank compared to others around the state? Unfortunately, Karen, I'm not the person who can answer that question. I know about this bank, but I don't work in the part of the Department of Ecology that does water banking. So I can't really compare and contrast this one with others. I can answer some specific questions about how this bank will work, but I don't think I can answer whether it's significantly different from other banks that have been established. I am sorry about that. If you send me an email and I can put my contact information into the chat, I can hunt that answer down for you and get it back to you. Edna Fund, one of our Chehalis Basin board members, thank you, Edna. What happens to the water rights if the dam is breached in the future? That's an excellent and important question. If the dam no longer exists, the water rights no longer exist. So the water rights are inextricably tied to the existence of the dam and especially to the reservoir behind it. So yes, if the dam is breached, the water rights no longer exist. There are all kinds of bigger questions about what that means. We have spoken with Ecology's water resources folks who are kind of the experts here. We think it's almost certainly, if that were to happen, there would have to be some kind of compensation for holders of water rights. So that is part of what we are looking into. What would the impact be to downstream water rights holders or folks who purchased an offset from the water bank? That's a central question that we're looking at as we explore these options in the future. We know that that's very, very important. Gary Morishima, can you provide this report from WDFW? That's pretty specific. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I don't know that report off the top of my head, but we will look into it and get back to you on that. Doug Jensen. Could I get more than just the summary report by Anchor? The link is available online, but provides only limited information. Doug, I think you'll have to get in contact with us and ask us a little more specifically what it is you're looking for. We do have some background information. Speaking a little more generally, I can say the first phase of this study, and I don't want to step on Mary's toes too much here because she will get into this, but the first phase of this study really was pretty general. It didn't go into a lot of detail. We didn't do extensive modeling. We did try and look at other reports that existed. It's not that there's some big model that we can point you towards or something like that. And the report by Anchor includes both an executive summary and I thought a fairly detailed report. So there should be some answers there. But if you have a specific question, definitely get in touch with us and we can answer that for you. I'm going to answer a few more questions. I'm just going to go for a couple of more minutes and then I'm going to hand it over to Mary, who's going to go through her presentation, and there'll be more time for Q&A after she's done. So if your question doesn't get answered here, don't worry, we'll have more time at the end. I just want to make sure Mary can get through her presentation as well. Mark Glide asks, I understand the dam was built to provide water to the coal plant, but was there any initial intention when the dam was built for it also to hold back floodwaters? The simple answer to that is no. This dam was never intended to be a flood protection dam. It was only ever built to hold water to discharge over the summer to ensure that there was sufficient water available to run that coal-fired plant. And that's why we have such intermittent benefit when it comes to downstream flooding from this dam. It was never intended to be operated for that purpose. And Mary is going to go into a few more details about the constraints that come in if you try to operate it for that purpose. I see George Luttrell here. Do you know what the water temps are from above the dam to below it for juvenile fish? That is an excellent question. The short answer is no. The longer answer is we do not have temperature monitoring above the dam. We do have some temperature monitoring below the dam. Additionally, TransAlta is required to operate their discharges through the dam in such a way to keep the temperature low enough for fish, especially Chinook, especially spring Chinook. So we know a fair amount about water temperatures downstream of the dam, but we do not know very much about water temperatures upstream of the dam, so it's difficult to compare them. I'm going to answer one more question, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mary. From Dave Bingaman. Even though FERC and TA, so the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and TransAlta had their review, this violated the agreement on the dam operation. Can you address that breach and what will be done? So that's a good question, Dave. The short answer is the Office of Chehalis Basin doesn't have any regulatory authority over this, and I'm not in that chain. So I do not know what is going to be done. That is something that's going to have to be worked out between FERC and TransAlta and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. The three of them have regulatory and operational control over the dam. We can look into that. We can see what's being proposed and what's being thought, but I can't answer that question right now. So I will do my best to get back to you on that. I think that's all I have time to answer right now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Mary, who's going to talk about our concept designs.
All right, thank you, Nat. And are folks seeing my slideshow?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go over kind of what we have been doing over the past year and where we are going in this year, 2022, and then into 2023. So in 2021, the Chehalis Basin Board requested that OCB conduct a phase 1 analysis to document what we do and don't know about the dam based on existing studies and reports, and identify the possibility of any near-term operational changes that could benefit fish passage, fish habitat, and/or flood storage, and then identify data gaps and recommend if there was any promise in doing any potential future analyses. So just for a view, here's a Google Earth view of the dam, and where I've got the 2 arrows. I will speak to a few of these things in the rest of the talk, and Nat had already mentioned the spillway, which is this left yellow arrow, and the fish sluice that is located in the spillway. It's on the left abutment of the dam. And then the intakes that TransAlta uses to regulate the discharges from the dam are located a little bit further upstream. So the phase 1 analysis, as I mentioned, really just compiled existing studies and reports, and we worked with TransAlta as well to document the existing dam configuration and operations and kind of what it was designed for. We also conducted a hydrologic analysis to understand what the volume of water that was flowing into the reservoir from upstream was, and then what the volume of water that was both discharged from the dam and also comes in from tributaries downstream of the dam is. And then using that basic hydrologic information, just did a very simple spreadsheet analysis to identify, if you had X number of CFS coming in upstream, how quickly, how much volume would that occupy within the reservoir, so that we could get a very simplistic sense at a first blush of how effective is fish passage, how often does it occur through the current system now, and then what possible flood storage might be able to be provided from the dam. We also looked a little bit, but there had been a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers study back in 2003, and it was updated in 2012, looking at the potential to modify the dam for flood storage, and they had provided preliminary design and some potential costs, and we escalated those costs to current dollars because that was a number of years ago, just to get a sense of kind of what the scale of potential costs might be if the dam was to be considered for modification. And then similar vein, looked at dam removal, like what could you do to remove the dam either fully or partially, and what would the scale of those costs be? And then we also summarized the water rights, which Nat has talked a bit about already, and I'll add a little bit more to that, but kind of existing water rights associated with the dam. So for reference, this is just a real basic schematic showing there's basically 2 main ways that water can come out of the dam. It can either go over the spillway or through the fish sluice, or water can be taken into the intakes that TransAlta can operate. If water goes through the intake system, it is then discharged either to the hatchery, through the hydropower turbine, or otherwise discharged downstream, and it enters the river at about the same place that water from the spillway and fish sluice enter downstream of the dam. And then here's also a simple schematic, because I will refer to a couple of these elevations in the rest of my talk. But the dam crest is at 497 feet. And this is in the NGVD 1929 datum that the dam was designed in. So 497 feet in that datum. The spillway crest is about 20 feet below the crest of the dam. So when the reservoir reaches an elevation of 477 feet, it passively spills over the spillway crest. As Nat had mentioned, the fish sluice is integrated into the spillway, but it's quite a bit lower than the top of the spillway. It's about 13 feet below. And so it can operate when the reservoir is at elevations 464 and above. And then the intakes are actually all at lower elevations so that water can be taken out both when the reservoir is high and when the reservoir is low. So there's multiple opportunities to take water out through the intake system. And here's another photo again showing the crest of the spillway and then kind of a close-up of that fish sluice that is in the corner of the spillway. So as I'd mentioned, we took a look through all the previous studies that had been done on the dam, and the Corps of Engineers study was one of the more detailed studies. And what they had proposed would be required if flood storage was to be a purpose of this dam was they proposed to install an outlet tunnel next to the spillway to increase the discharge capacity that can be controlled rather than the passive overflow over the spillway, because currently the intake system can only discharge about a maximum of 240 CFS, and that is a pretty small amount of water to be trying to flush out of the reservoir if you are trying to draw the reservoir down to maintain basically an empty pocket so that you could store floodwater that might come in on the next storm. And so the current intake system really limits the amount of water that can be discharged downstream. And so that's why the Corps of Engineers had proposed that they would need to actually create a new outlet tunnel. And then they also looked at adding gates on top of the spillway that could provide the potential to raise the reservoir capacity to provide more storage, and it could be operated during predicted pretty high floods like 50 or 100-year floods, pretty catastrophic floods. And so in the phase one analysis, we escalated the costs from those older dollars. And so roughly what that translates to today for that design would be a little over $20 million for the outlet tunnel, which would provide about 11,000 acre feet of storage, and nearly $30 million to include the gates on the spillway. So that would 30 million would include both elements, which would give you about 20,000 acre feet of storage. However, at the time that those studies were done, the cost that they were developing did not include mitigation costs or increased operational costs that would be required to actively manage gates, for example, or actively discharge water from the dam to anticipate flooding that might be coming. So operational costs would be quite a lot higher than they currently are now. And looking at potential dam removal, as I mentioned, dam removal could be partial, and this photo that I'm showing is of another dam that was partially removed on the coast of Oregon. It's incidentally called Skookumchuck Dam. It is on the coast of Oregon, and so this dam was partially removed to save costs, and what they did was basically breach the dam down to the river level, but did not remove the entire prism of fill, because this was also an earth fill dam similar to Skookumchuck. They did not remove all of that dirt that had comprised the dam. And so at a pretty conceptual level, looking at dam removal costs, they range from about $20 million to $50 million. So similar scale of costs to modifying the dam potentially for flood storage for removal. These costs did not include additional restoration upstream of the reservoir. If habitat conditions upstream of the reservoir need a fair amount of restoration to make them really high quality, this initial estimate does not include those costs. So kind of the takeaways from this phase one analysis, which is summarized in that phase one summary report that Nat mentioned, was that fish passage and flood storage are really not currently compatible. The reason for that is that to provide a long period of time for juvenile fish to exit the dam, you need to keep the reservoir fairly full above elevation 464 so that water can spill out of the fish sluice. And the flood storage option, you would want to reduce the level of the reservoir as low as you could and maintain it throughout much of the winter and spring during the flood season. And so those are kind of at cross purposes. Fish passage is compatible with the water supply purpose, and that makes a lot of sense. The dam was designed for water supply, thus the fish passage facilities were designed to be compatible with water supply. The downstream fish passage period of time when the reservoir is full enough to provide downstream fish passage generally is the reservoir is high enough from about late November to early June in most years. And so that does encompass the time period when a lot of fish, particularly steelhead, which are the fish that have been transported upstream, would be out migrating in the springtime, early to late spring. And even in pretty dry years, the reservoir is generally full enough to allow fish passage through the sluice, generally from January to at least late May. It's a little bit shorter window than would occur in wetter years, but even in drier years, that is feasible. However, as Nat had mentioned, the current fish sluice configuration with its high velocities and this chute that then goes downstream and returns to the river is a very steep passageway with high velocities and a lot of turbulence. Modifications to the fish sluice and this downstream sluice or providing a different passageway for fish would be a lot more effective than what is currently out there. And then from the water rights summary, Nat had already mentioned what TransAlta's current water right is, and that entire water right was placed into a water bank. TransAlta did apply for a temporary water right to use about half of that to continue to operate their one turbine through 2025. And they also hold a non-consumptive water right of 140 CFS to operate the small hydropower turbine at the dam, and that is proposed to continue operating after 2025. And WDFW holds 2 non-consumptive water rights that add up to 30 CFS at the hatchery. The water, as Nat had mentioned, is provided from the dam, and the hatchery is proposed to continue to remain in operation after 2025. And at this point in time, TransAlta has assumed they will continue to operate the dam after 2025 and continue to provide these water rights. That's their current proposal. The city of Centralia has agreed to purchase a little under a quarter of the volume of the water right from the TransAlta water bank. There's about 28,000 total acre feet in the water bank, and so the city of Centralia has agreed to purchase about just under 7,000 acre feet. They have also been working collaboratively with the city of Chehalis on this purchase because both cities are interested in obtaining this water right. And then, as Nat had mentioned, downstream along the Skookumchuck River are an additional about 21 CFS of water rights, and these are not related to TransAlta. I believe one of the questions in the chat was that several of these water rights pre-exist the dam, and that is true. Quite a few of them do pre-exist the dam, but some of them have been granted since the dam. And so that's something we're going to be looking into a little bit more detail as we go into this, what we're calling the phase 2 analysis that's happening right now. So the phase 2 analysis is going to be continuing through this year, and probably the results will be available in early 2023. So we don't have any results to present tonight. That study is just embarking. But there's going to be a fairly big focus on actually doing detailed hydraulic modeling associated with both fish passage at the fish sluice and then downstream of the dam, downstream to the Chehalis River, because we really want to understand in more detail exactly what kind of flood benefit is provided currently and maybe with proposed modifications, and how flows and hydraulics would change with fish passage or dam removal as well, to identify if any of these scenarios are feasible. And at this point, we are not saying that any of them are feasible. We're simply trying to determine that over the next year. We are also developing some concept designs for more modernized downstream fish passage that would actually meet current fish passage requirements at dams. As Nat had mentioned, those facilities are quite old, from 1970, and a lot of knowledge has been gained for fish passage at dams over the last 40, 50 years. We will also do an initial evaluation of potential benefits and impacts, and then are also looking at doing some additional investigation upstream of the reservoir to identify what the quality and quantity of habitat is up there, and adding that new information into the habitat model that has been developed for the basin as part of the Chehalis Basin strategy, and particularly the portion that has been developed for the aquatic species restoration plan. And so with that, that's generally where we're going. And like I mentioned, we will have results probably in early 2023. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Well, we definitely have had a flood of questions coming through. I don't know if you want me to highlight any of them, Mary, or if you can see them on your screen there a bit. Nat's also been answering. So for folks who are on the webinar, making sure to check that answered tab to see all the great information that's been put in there as well, because everyone's been asking a lot of great questions tonight already.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start, I guess, where Nat left off on the chat. Does that make sense? So let's see, the next question was, what kind of maintenance and updating does the dam need? So TransAlta has been maintaining the dam throughout its operation, and prior to when TransAlta purchased the dam, it was owned by a consortium of utilities who also performed maintenance. But as I mentioned, definitely updating the fish sluice could be one of the options. We have not delved into any other types of maintenance associated with generally operating the dam at this point. And then Edna had asked a question about, after TransAlta, who has the responsibility of maintaining the dam? At this point, TransAlta has proposed to continue operating and maintaining the dam, so they're planning to continue ownership at this point. So we don't have a future scenario that might be different from TransAlta. Dave Peeler said, what is the altitude, which I think you meant elevation of the river below the dam? And I will have to get back to you, as I cannot recall off the top of my head, but the dam is several hundred feet high, so it's quite a bit of elevation from the top of the dam down to the river below. Let's see. Is there, I might have, the questions sort of scrolled strangely for me. Let's see, so Doug Jensen said he recalled the core analysis and its update on the dam and scope and mitigation of flooding of I-5, and not solely focused on the crest and flooding on the Skookumchuck. Because there's no linkage between the Chehalis and Skookumchuck studies, will there be new analyses or studies separate from the core proposals on its broader purposes and scope? So the Chehalis Basin strategy as a whole that Nat represents, the Office of Chehalis Basin, is undertaking with guidance and direction from the Chehalis Basin Board, is looking at a local actions non-dam alternative, and that process has just embarked, and they will be looking at a variety of flood damage reduction measures throughout the basin, and some of those could incorporate ideas that had been proposed by the Corps and others in the past, as well as new ideas that they will be developing. So yes, there will be further ideas proposed. None of the work that is happening either with Skookumchuck Dam or this local action non-dam alternative is ready to go into like permitting or environmental review or anything like that, because there really aren't any specific proposals yet. But if any of them do result in specific proposals, then they would go into permitting and environmental review. Sean Swope asked the question, who paid to put the dam in? So it was a consortium of utilities back in the 60s, including the Bonneville Power Administration, Pacific Power and Light, and several of the local utility districts in Western Washington. And then, so they were the ones who actually designed and installed the dam. And then TransAlta purchased the dam in the late 1990s. And TransAlta does own the dam outright at this point in time. I do not know what TransAlta, if they paid separately for the water right, or if basically purchasing the dam and the power plant came with the rights. I don't think they were separated. It all came together. And if the water rights are tied to the dam existing, does that mean whoever owns the dam going forward owns the water rights? Good question. Yes, I believe that TransAlta could probably sell the dam either with or without the water rights. But if somebody purchased it without the water rights, they would still be required to provide those water rights, even if TransAlta still owned them. So I'm not, that's very speculative. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know the exact situation. Raylene Gold asked, is there any consideration of modifying the dam for hydroelectric production? So there is a very small hydropower turbine on the dam currently. It's only 1 megawatt, which is very small, small enough to be under the threshold that even though the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission does regulate the dam's operation, it actually doesn't regulate the hydropower generation because it's under the threshold for regulation. At this point in time, I do not know of any proposal to modify the dam for hydroelectric production beyond what is already there. And let's see. Dave Peeler, has WGFW conducted studies to estimate the number of returning salmon and steelhead and smolts probably headed downstream through the dam? So they definitely do conduct studies to estimate the number of returning salmon, and all of the steelhead actually do return to the fish collection facility at the dam. The coho that are hatchery derived return to the hatchery, and then Chinook, which are not produced at the hatchery, are wild and they are counted in the river. So all of the adult salmon are counted and estimated, but the smolts and the juveniles going downstream are not monitored at the dam. So there are no estimates at this point in time about smolts going either through the dam or immediately downstream of the dam. The overall population of fish are monitored through some smolt trapping operations further downstream in the Chehalis River and in other locations. And let's see, I think I answered that one. Gary Morishima had a question. Did your study of operations involve an examination of flow impacts beyond consideration of fish passage? For example, habitats for spawning and rearing of habitats. So no, we have not evaluated anything downstream of the dam at this point in time, and that is part of the phase 2 analysis. And let's see. Are there any old water rights above the dam that were affected by the dam? Not that I am aware of. We have searched the ecology's water rights database, and there are a few wells upstream of the dam, but there are currently no recorded water rights above the dam. And let's see. There's a long question here or comment from Colonel Averill, and said the dam modification briefed by Ms. Martz were part of the flood mitigation project started by the Corps as the result of the 1996 flood. The project also included additional levees in the I-5 corridor. The whole project was abandoned by the Corps around 2010. The revisions proposed to the dam, particularly the increased capacity to discharge water, were of concern because there has never been a seismic study of the dam. The dam is an earthen dam, and the Corps study never determined whether their proposed revisions would impact the stability of the dam. He was a Lewis County commissioner from 2006 to 2012 when much of the Corps project was active. And yes, that is correct. Everything that you cited there, Colonel, is correct. Karen Fraser asked, I'm having trouble with the chat. When TransAlta sells water rights, do they have to sell them in order request like typical water rights, or can they pick and choose who to sell to? I do not know. As Nat had mentioned, that we are not part of the Ecology Water Rights group, so I do not know what their agreement stated about priority of selling water rights. Is dissolved gas supersaturation a problem below the dam? The spillway drop seems pretty excessive, and I do not believe that that has been monitored and has not been required to be monitored. So I do not think there's any information. If the dam is removed, won't the reservoir walls below the water line have increased erosion that raises the turbidity of the river, possibly killing the fish species that have been mentioned? There would absolutely have to be some restoration and plantings and other measures taken if the dam was removed to stabilize any slopes upstream of the dam. But that has not been evaluated at this point in time. Kevin Jensen is asked, will agriculture adjacent to the Skookumchuck River be given priority to purchase water rights from the water bank created from the TransAlta transfer? And I don't have an answer for that, but I think that is a good question that we will be tracking as part of our further analyses. And let's see. Dave Peeler asks, is there an online accounting of the water sold from the water bank that the public can view? Are those sales permanent or temporary? Nat, I don't know if you know the answer to that.
I know the answer to one of those questions, sort of. So TransAlta is required by their agreement with Ecology to track all of the sales that they make from their water bank of offsets. And they are required to report that to the Department of Ecology. And the Department of Ecology is further required to keep that information recorded. I do not know if there's a web page where you can get it, but I do know that it is public information. So it is something that you can get. Whether or not there's a page you can go to look at, I'm not sure. Whether the sales are permanent or temporary, I honestly do not know the answer to that question. That's something we would have to put to our water resources folks.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. And then there's a question from Donna Albert. There's a great table in the study for the PL dam that showed the predicted numbers of salmon for each option, including the no dam option. Will there be something like that table at some point for this dam so that we can clearly see the bottom line results for fish for each option? And that's a great question. The phase 2 study that we're currently working on, we are intending to update the fish habitat model that will generate some results about projected number of fish that could use the upstream area and projected effects downstream. So there will be some results. As I had mentioned, as there is no specific proposal to carry any of these scenarios forward at this point in time, there will be less detailed analysis for this study than what has happened for the proposed dam up by PL, because that has moved much further into design and environmental review. So there will be some information available about potential effects to fish from this study, but it will not be to the level of detail that has been conducted for the other proposed dam. And did I miss anything?
I think that's all the questions that we've gotten.
Yeah, and I just wanted to check in, Karen Frazier. I know your hand had been up earlier and just wanted to check to make sure that you had gotten your questions in the chat, because I know a number of them had come through the Q&A, but just making sure that we got those. And there should be an unmute button for you, because we've allowed you to talk, but if not, I do know that.
Great. Yeah, hi, Karen here. Yeah, I couldn't figure out, I thought we were using the chat for questions and turned out my chat didn't work. Then I figured out Q&A worked, so I'm fine. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you. A couple more questions came in. So Doug Jensen asked about if other committee Zoom meetings, which are also recorded, if those meeting minutes and agendas do not appear to include all the handouts presented live, can they be posted? I think you're talking about the board meetings. I'm not sure, but certainly the Chehalis Basin board meeting presentations, meetings, and agendas are posted. And I believe all of the other meetings that have been recorded and made publicly available are also available. Nat, you might want to answer that.
Yeah, and if you're asking specifically about this webinar, we did record it. We are going to try and post it for you. There was another question about the Q&As and getting those posted. So we're going to look into that too. I think we've done that with some previous meetings as well. So yeah, you're right. There have been some great questions here, and I think we'd love to get those documented. I did put in one of the responses. Thank you, Ken. So Ken just put into the chat that they're where the board meeting agendas are. And I'm going to drop into the chat the link to the Skookumchuck Dam webpage, which is where we will post anything that comes out of this meeting.
Yeah, and Lee first had asked a question at the beginning and reminded me again of just wanted to know how many people attended this webinar. And I believe a few people have dropped up, but the highest number I saw in there was 71. I know, Tess, if you had seen a different number.
Yes, that is also what I had seen. So really, really great engagement tonight from everyone.
Yeah, so I think we've wrapped up the Q&A. Obviously, we're early, so if folks have more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. For right now, I just wanted to say, talk a little bit about our timeline. I think, Mary, maybe you already talked about this a little bit. I apologize. I was answering questions, so I wasn't paying perfect attention during your presentation. But our plan right now is to present a report to the Chehalis Basin Board sometime in the fall of this year, of 2022. So that will, of course, be a public meeting that folks can attend, respond to. We do hope to also have at least one more public meeting or forum like this before then, when we've gotten a little bit further into our analyses and we have a little more to present to folks. We have not scheduled that, so I can't say when exactly it will be. But I did put the link to the Skookumchuck Dam webpage, and Tess posted the link to the Skookumchuck Dam webpage. So you have two links in the chat, and that's where all of our information about this project is going to live. Excuse me. So Tess posted that for everyone. So if you go to that webpage, information will be there. And just like with this webinar, if and when we have a future webinar, we will do our best to make folks aware via all the means we have available to us. Social media, we'll send out notices to local papers, all of those things. Ken just posted to the chat my email address. If you have questions about the dam you don't feel were answered here, you want to go into more detail, absolutely feel free to email me. I will do my very best to answer those questions or to route you to the right person who can answer those questions. Mary, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
I I see Ken just posted my email address as well. Since I work for NAT and the Office of Chehalis Basin, I think any questions that come directly to me will get routed through NAT. And so definitely if you got questions, you can send them to me, but I will probably route them through NAT before replying to you. There's another couple questions. One is about is upstream trap and haul in use, and somebody had missed that part of the discussion. And yes, there has been starting in 2021 some limited upstream trap and haul. It was not to the scale that was done in the 90s, but there has been some limited outplanting of steelhead upstream. And Dave Bingaman asks, how might the removal or not removal of the dam impact the in-stream flow requirement of recent state legislation? That is something that will be looked at, but we don't have an answer at this time. And then a thank you.
Well,
Thank
Gary
you.
Morishima did ask one more question.
Oh,
Will draft reports be available for public review and comment? We haven't decided that yet, Gary. We will definitely be circulating draft reports to the project team we have working on this, which includes folks from Bucota and Centralia and a number of folks representing fish interests. So they will certainly be able to review and respond to those draft reports. We have not decided yet whether to make the draft reports public. So we will decide that when we get there. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions come into the Q&A. So I think we can wrap it up a little bit early and give people a little more time back in their evenings. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. We very much appreciate it. This Q&A has been great, and I hope you'll stay engaged and keep following this project as we move along.
Yeah, we appreciate you all joining.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.